Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the 9th debate of Lent's term. Last week, we decided that this House would support Scottish independence. Tonight, the motion is this House believes that fair trade is unfair. However, before we start, I want to make a quick announcement. Those of you who are regulars of the Union Society this term will have no doubt seen Carl, our senior officer, present many talks this term. In fact, I think he's had more talks this term than any other senior officer in history, or so he informs me. But however, Carl is going to Libya next week, so he won't be here for the change of officers debate, and hence we won't be able to give him a thanks next week. So I was hoping that you would all join me in a warm round of applause for Carl for doing a wonderful job this term. With one quick other union plug, on Saturday we're holding our elections for this term. Please come down. Voting is between 8 a.m. and 9 p.m., so all day, and it's your chance to get a say in how your union is run in Michaelmas 2008. Now, without further ado, I'm going to introduce the first speaker for this evening, David Henderson. David has flown in all the way from San Francisco this week to speak to us tonight, and David wrote a book called The Joy of Freedom, so please give him a warm welcome.
Thank you. In my view of fairness, there are two reasonable ways to judge a situation unfair. The first is to show that it forcibly prevents people from engaging in peaceful activities. So, for example, the government of the United States prevents people from going to Cuba. That's unfair to Americans who don't get to go to Cuba, and it's unfair to Cubans who don't get to visit with Americans. The British government imposes a 15% tariff on bicycles sold from outside the EU. That's unfair to consumers, and it's unfair to producers who would like to sell. Fortunately, fair trade is not unfair in that sense. To their credit, the advocates of fair trade want to persuade people to buy, and I have no difficulty with that. But the second way to show that a policy is unfair is to show that those pushing for the policy are giving false or misleading information to the people they're trying to persuade. The people pushing this policy are unfair to those who are misled. In this second sense, fair trade is unfair. That means that to make the case that fair trade is unfair, I need to establish what I just said. And to do this, I need to get into the economics of fair trade. First of all, what are the rules for fair trade? How does a firm qualify to get the fair trade label? It might surprise you to know that it has only a little to do with how it treats employees. There are some clear-cut good standards, no forced labor. I completely agree with that. But small firms aren't even allowed to have a full-time, year-round employee, not one, for them to qualify. There are other standards also, which I'll mention later as I make the rest of my argument. Now, I'm an economist, so when I look at someone setting a price that's above the market price, my little economist brain kicks in, and some of you might say it's little, but I see a price floor. And here's the economics of a price floor when it's run by government. When it's run by government, they set the price above the market price. Producers want to produce more than consumers want to buy, and you get a surplus. The difference is, for the fair trade price, there's no guaranteed buyer. So what happens? What happens is that people will tend to produce for that higher price, and there isn't a guaranteed buyer, so there might be a surplus. It isn't necessarily big, but there might be a surplus that drives down the price somewhat to other people, thus hurting those other people. Now, also, a substantial amount of the gains of fair trade are eaten up by the bureaucracy. Two forms of bureaucracy. First, the fair trade bureaucracy. You have to pay a fee to be a member, and the fee is between about $2,000 and $4,000, which doesn't sound like a lot to us, but it's a large amount for someone in some of these third world countries or for a cooperative. The second is you have to have a cooperative. You have to have a cooperative that distributes some of that price premium to the farmers, but it has to be chosen by a democratic mechanism, and that means that a farmer might not get the particular part of the benefit he wants. Now, The fair trade, as I said, is a price floor, but it's a funny kind of price floor. It has an interesting effect that Colleen Berndt, an economist at San Jose State University, pointed out in an article on this. And it has the effect of actually, ironically, giving the fair trade buyer potentially low-quality coffee. Imagine that you're a farmer and you've got good quality coffee and low-quality coffee, and you want to sell your coffee at the fair trade price, which is above the market price. Well, if you look at all the fair trade standards, there's very little said about the actual quality of the product. It's about things like whether they use genetic modification, which I'll talk about a little later, whether you hire workers, how you run the firm, whether you use pesticides. So since there isn't that big an emphasis on high quality, what happens? The ultimate fair trade customers sometimes get low quality. Why? Think of it from the producer's viewpoint. He would like to sell whatever he can at that premium price, and if they aren't paying attention to quality, he'll sell them his low quality and sell the high quality on the market. That's kind of unfair to the customers if they're not told that. There's a kind of a funny free rider problem here. I mentioned that it's sold to a cooperative. Well, think about the word cooperative. That means they're taking all kinds of farmers' beans and putting them together. So a farmer who wants to establish a reputation for high quality can't necessarily establish that reputation because his beans are being mixed with everyone else's. It's a free rider problem, and it's one that it's also a tragedy of the commons problem. In 1832, William Forster Lloyd, a political economist at Oxford University, that's somewhere down the road, I think.
A lesser university.
Looking at the recurring devastation of common pastures in England, asked, why are the cattle on the common so puny and stunted? Why is the common itself so bare worn and cropped so differently from the adjoining enclosures? His answer was that since no one owned the commons, no one took account of the damage done to it and therefore grazed the extra cow. Similarly with coffee, since no farmer is responsible for the quality of the coffee or gets credit for quality, no farmer has a strong incentive to produce quality. So where are we in all this? Fair trade does give higher prices to producers, but only in a fairly limited supply. The producers get only some of the higher price directly. The rest goes to the cooperative bureaucracy, and some of it is eaten up in the fee for certification. The producers do gain to the extent the cooperative spends on things that the producers value, but because it's a democratic decision rather than an individual decision, the spending might be on things that producers value only a little or not at all. There's one other potentially major problem. Not for the coffee market, which I've emphasized so far, but for the banana market. There's fair trade in bananas as well as in coffee. As I noted earlier, to have your product counted as fair trade, you must not use genetic modification. That could matter a lot for bananas, and in a negative way. In a recent book called Banana, The Fate of the Fruit That Changed the World, science writer Dan Capel tells us that the banana is now threatened with extinction. 2 generations ago, the most common banana was the Gros Michel, the Big Mike. It was wiped out by Panama disease. Now the most common banana is the Cavendish. The brand name on the Cavendish banana you're most familiar with, I think, is Fife's. Did I say it right? I just read it. In the United States, it's Chiquita. I know